Hi guys, Asmo here, and today I have for you a tier list for the 324 Necropolis League. This is going to be, full disclaimer, my personal subjective tier list. I'm gonna give you my take on all of these starter builds that I've picked here. This is not all of the builds, so that's another disclaimer. There's not gonna be every single skill, but this is the most popular league starters. I basically looked at different league starter lists. I looked at different league starter videos. I looked at different content creators that I know I can trust in terms of their opinions, and I took this all with a grain of salt, filter it through my own opinions and thoughts, and I'm gonna try to give you like a summary for each build, maybe what it's good at, maybe what are the drawbacks of playing it, so that I can help you figure out what would be your next league starter according to your playstyle and your preferences. And you can, again, take what I say with a grain of salt. This is all very, very subjective. So first we got anime weapons. So anime weapons, I think I would put in like a C tier. Maybe first I'll explain the tiers, okay? So XDD tier, you're gonna see this is a tier of its own. You can probably guess what's in this tier. If you're up to date on the PoE meta, you probably know what's in this tier. Tier S are going to be basically exceptional skills, exceptional builds that are really, really good, and they are like top of the line builds. Some of them are like specialized at something, but they will be able to accomplish things that most builds are simply not capable of even accomplishing. Then we have tier A, which are simply good builds. You're gonna have good time playing them. They're strong. They either do something extremely well or they are just very good overall. Then you have a B tier, which is where I think probably most things would fall in like a B tier or C tier out of these starters. So B tier is gonna be pretty decent. It's gonna still be a good league starter. Or it's going to be really, really good if you particularly like the playstyle or if you particularly like the archetype. These builds could be like, for some people, better than S tier if they really like it. But overall, for like everyone, it's going to be pretty like B tier, which is like good. You should be like happy like if you start this, if you chose this, but it's not gonna be like amazing. Then we have C tier, which is going to be either weak build or it has some issues. Certain builds have like very specific issues that make it really not a very powerful build because of the specific drawbacks that they have. So it might be about the power, but for example, in terms of animate weapon, it's not really about the power, it's about the convenience, right? So animate weapon is very inconvenient to play. This is why I would not recommend as a league starter, because every single zone you have to resummon the animate weapons. There are different versions of the build. It is really strong for bossing, for example, for specific encounters, but it has very significant drawbacks in terms of the clunky playstyle. So that's why I would put it in, for example, like a C tier. You can start it if you really, really like it, but it's not going to be incredibly amazing. Then we have a tier for not starters. So a lot of the builds, you might be confused when I put them here, but this is basically a build that can be really, really good. It can be extremely strong build. Spoiler alert, I think I'm going to put the strongest build in the game here, but it's not a league starter, right? You're probably going to have a bad time if you start this because it's not going to come online very early. It's going to require a lot of currency, or it's going to have some other issues. And speaking of currency, we have the MasterCard tier. These are the builds that you probably shouldn't start unless you really like to put a lot of currency in the build. These are builds that like really require a lot of currency to get started, and it's kind of a meme as well. But let's start with this. So animate weapon, I already talked about it, C tier. Then we have arc. So arc, I think I would put also in the same tier. So the problem with arc is the single target damage. The arc of oscillating, or whatever it was called, was fixed, so it no longer deals zillion hits to a single target. So single target is going to be an issue. You can play arc ignite, for example, with the Val arc, and this is something that can like pop legions and perform very well if that in that. But other than that, arc is simply just a little bit underpowered on its own, and it needs to leverage certain like very specific mechanics, or you need to invest into it a lot of currency. It doesn't just like out of the gate like blow everything up, right? So it's not a great league starter. I would definitely put it as has some issues like with single target and is relatively weak. Then we have mana builds. So mana builds, this is what I would put as not a starter. And there are exceptions to this, right? So an exception to this would be, for example, a corpse blaster, right, with Kitava's Thirst. But that's because it uses a broken skill. Other than that, mana skills typically tend to require more investment and more currency to start doing real damage, right? I've heard people talk about different mana builds, and I think they're gonna be very strong. I don't get me wrong, like they're just not gonna be great starters for everyone, because a lot of people are simply not going to be able to manage all of their resistances, all of their life requirements, all of the damage requirements, while at the same time getting also the mana rolls on all of their gear, right? That's gonna be something that requires crafting. For crafting, you need currency. For currency, most people need a build to farm something, and if you don't have a starter build to farm something, right? If your build doesn't work without the last step, then how can you do the first step? So other people would get stuck a little bit, and it would be not a good starter. So I would definitely recommend mana builds next league. There are going to be some very powerful ones, but not as a league starter in my opinion. That's just my personal opinion. Then we have Armageddon brand, right? This is Armageddon brand. There's so many brands here. I think this is Armageddon brand. So Armageddon brand, I would probably put at, it's either, I mean, I would probably put it in an A tier. And this is not the brand recall version, by the way. So Armageddon brand has a lot of different ways you can play it. First of all, it is excellent at leveling, right? Like leveling, you're just gonna blast through the game. It has incredibly nice clear. And then there are so many different ways you can leverage and transition from it, right? So you could transition into Arma brand recall, right? Which I might as well already put it here. Because this is going to be an S tier league starter probably. I might as well put it here, but Arma brand by itself is just such a comfortable, strong skill. Also has a transfigured version. If you want to play Ignite, there is a version that hits only once, right? And if you were playing an Ignite version, you could do something like, for example, get an early Explode chest, which is cheaper than you would think. It's actually way cheaper than you would think. You get some Harvest Essence, you get an Influence chest, and you just spam the Harvest Essence, and it doesn't, not Harvest, yeah, you just spam the Harvest Reforge Fizz. It doesn't take that many times to get an Explode, and you have insane clear with like explosions, proliferations on Elementalist. Then you can use things like Flame Surge for single target, or you can use some corpse skill, like you can use like, for example, Cremation for single target as well, right? I really liked Flame Surge. I did Sanctum on this. This is really good Sanctum league starter as well, because of how comfortable it is and how easy it is to just like run around and do damage at the same time. So I really recommend this as a starter. Like you can get to like 2 million DPS very easily, kill everything that you need to in the beginning of the game, and then you can either farm currency very quickly or transition into something else. You can, for example, transition into the recaller or whatever you want, right? So definitely I would put it as a very, very solid league starter, like something that you'll really have a good time with if you start with and build it properly. And then we have the brand recaller. So brand recaller, this is a more complicated build. You have to understand the game a little bit better, but it is very strong. Like it's very strong. It's very comfortable to play. Can also transition into, if you remember the Blade Blast Unloader build, which is not here because it's not really a league starter build. I think the guy who made the Blade Blast Unloader was saying that probably he will recommend people start with the Arma brand recall because it's just so strong early on, right? So I would say this is probably one of the S tier starters. Really, really excellent. Like comfy clear, you know, of course you start with Arma brand, right? So you level this very, very quickly as well. And then it has really good single target damage once you set it up properly. Very strong. Then we have Artillery Ballista. So Artillery Ballista, I think other people might disagree with me, but I think this is definitely an A tier starter. Artillery Ballista can be played as a supplementary skill for something like Lightning Arrow, or it can be played on its own as your main skill. There is also now transfigured version of Artillery Ballista. As far as I know, it shoots like in like an X, right? Which is what like the alternate quality of it was doing, which can get really crazy single target damage. It scales even with projectiles. It can be paired with something like Blast Rain. So typically when you have a Ballista setup and a skill setup, like a self-cast bow skill, you will have the Ballista for single target, you will drop them for single target, and you were clear with your main skill that you're shooting. Artillery Ballista is a little bit different because it has a skill called Blast Rain that is working exactly the same. Basically, it shoots like a circle, like payload into the air, and then a circle like explosion arrow falls down. But the blast rain has covers enemy in ash, I think, or maybe it was alternate quality. I'm not sure if the regular quality still has it, but it scales with the number of projectile, increasing its single target damage, and it also they both convert like physical to fire damage. It's really good. Also, it penetrated damage by default, right? I think it still penetrates fires by default, so you can have ballistas for your clear and blast rain for single target. Either way, ballistas are excellent. Even if you're playing like lightning arrow, this is just something you should be using very strong. Now we got a blade vortex. So a blade vortex I would probably put as not a starter. So blade vortex, for example, I've seen people like play poison blade vortex on a starter. The problem with that is that if you're using Pathfinder, it's not the greatest ascendancy for that, because you do get poison prolif, but your poisons from the blade vortex are not very big because you're stacking a large amount of them, right? You're not making like one big poison with a big hit. So this is really not a great league starter because of lacking AoE, lacking speed, lacking QOL. If you're going elemental, you don't have the damage. If you're going poison, you don't have the AoE. So it's really inconvenient to start early on. It's just pretty underpowered early on. It has either really nice clear or really nice damage, but if you go in one of the other direction, it's really gonna lack in the other department, right? So this is a great build, right? If you have some currency to put into it. As a starter, I would definitely not recommend it. Then we have Bama. Bama I would put probably in A tier. So Bama has huge potential. If you're playing in a group, it's an S tier, right? Most people don't play in a group. I would put it in an A tier. It has a little bit, it depends on the leveling. You can actually level no, because you have to pass to like duration node or like cooldown reduction nodes for this as well from like a bow cluster or something. So I would say there are a few things that are holding it from an S tier as a starter, because for a lot of people it's going to be crappy to level, and the strongest version is probably going to be Necromancer, which is probably the hardest one to level, and I think it's definitely going to be a very good build. It doesn't require that much currency to get off the ground, but it has a little bit awkward leveling. It's not perfect, right? It's not perfect. I wouldn't quite put it in S tier, but I think it's still pretty strong, right? The main problems of it are it's not that fast in terms of the mobility, right? Because, yeah, you have blink arrow, mirror arrow, but those are not great skills for mobility. It's not like shield charge or getting a lot of movement speed, which would be pretty difficult to get as well on Necromancer, considering you already are stretched on the tree. But definitely an A tier league starter, definitely a build that you'll have a really good time if you start. Then we have a Bone Shatter. So Bone Shatter, some people have it in like an S tier. I think because of the Warcry changes, I would knock it down a tier at least. Definitely still, I think, is there any other like melee skills? There's like Cleave. There's probably the best melee skill still, right? Probably the best melee skill still. I don't play melee much, so I cannot really give you that much information about this specific build, but I think this is still probably the way to go as a melee build. Now we have Caustic Arrow. So Caustic Arrow, I would put it probably as like a C tier weak build. Single target is pretty weak. If you're doing poison, it requires a little bit of investment to get off the ground, and it's still not as strong as some alternatives. So as a bow skill, it's not the best. It has some potential, so you can definitely play it as a league starter. Like, I think all of these builds here, like, you can play it as a league starter if you want, right? Because this game is very open-ended. You can basically start with any of those skills, and if you're a good enough player, if you practiced with the build, if you're knowledgeable about it, if you have a good like strategy figured out of how you're gonna get your currency and how you're gonna upgrade your character, you can start with anything you want. But relative to other things, it's gonna be in the weaker category. Now we have Cleave. So I think I would put Cleave maybe in the same tier as well. Relatively weak. It's gonna lack single target damage, but you can have a really good clear on Cleave. So you can play Cleave of Rage. You can play Cleave with like I played like Ignite based Cleave with like a 200 alternate quality version. I don't think there is that version anymore. But Cleave can have really good clear. It can be really nice for mapping, which is why it could be okay league starter, but it's gonna like suck on single target damage. And here's my controversial pick, I think, which is also Corrupting Fever. I'll also put it at a C tier probably. Maybe B tier. Actually, maybe B tier. The problem with this is the single target damage, right? It has such a low amount of single target damage early, but it has really, really good clear, right? The clear on this is very good early. I would put it at B tier, I guess. The B tier, I guess. Cyclone, this is gonna be again another one of those weak things. This is like weak, suboptimal skills to play early. It's not gonna do enough damage for you unless you chose to go this way, right? Put it in the master card tier. But I think this is gonna be like on its own, unless you're playing like custom crit or something. It's not gonna be that good. This is a Zoo Necromancer. So this is basically, I got this here because I made a guide for leveling Necromancer. So I thought I'm gonna put this specifically here so that I can tell you where this build would rank. And I think this build would rank generally probably around a B tier. So this is where I would probably put like a Zoo Necromancer that uses like skeletons, zombies, phantasms, all that stuff combined. I would put it in a B tier because early on you really need some like plus to the levels, right? Once you get levels, once you start like over leveling the level of the zone, right, it becomes stronger and stronger. When you get your animate guardian, it becomes stronger as well. When you get your hungry loop, it becomes stronger. Like, so the more levels you get, when you get your cluster jewels and stuff like that, it becomes stronger. But it doesn't have like this really quick like huge jump when you get into the maps. You don't just destroy everything, right? You do fine against bosses, but like the clear might be like a little bit slower than some other builds. Like it's gonna be slower than Armabrand, right? It's gonna be slower than artillery ballista, I think, right? If you pair it with like a good clear skill, especially, right? So it's gonna be slower than some of these builds. That's why I would put it in like a B tier. But it's gonna have, for example, like way better single target damage than Corrupting Fever, right? It's like against bosses and map bosses and big essences and things like that, you're gonna have a good time. But the clear is gonna be slightly slower, but you're gonna be moving fast because of the shield charge, right? So it's still good starter, but I wouldn't put it in like an A tier or something like that. Then we have XDD tier. So Detonate Dead, there are many different options. I think Nick, I'm Exile, made a video about different versions of DD, comparing all of them. So if you want to play the strongest build this league, definitely recommend checking that out. Ventura also put out a video about leveling, I think, Inquisitor Custom Crit DD, which I think is the single strongest build in this league, especially for softcore. Good clear, very quick build, lots of damage, cheap, like low budget, right? And you can set it up to do like, 20-30 million DPS on very cheap, and it's very strong. So definitely the strongest build of the league. Very weird that it didn't get nerfed. Like last league, people were already like weirded out why it didn't get nerfed, and now it's even stronger because we have new specters that have more life from the T17 maps, and they're gonna make DD even stronger. What? Really crazy that this thing didn't get nerfed, but it is what it is. XDD tier exists solely for this skill because it's just better than everything else. Then we have Divine Ire. So Divine Ire I would put in... would I put it in C or would I put it... I did start Divine Ire one of the leagues, but then I swapped into Armabrand and I had much better time. It's actually in Sanctum League I started with this. It got buffed since then. So it's definitely something you can league start with, but you're not going to have as good of a time as with those a little bit stronger skills. Divine Ire is a fun skill if you enjoy this, so definitely it's like not for everyone, right? I would definitely say practice it, play with it a little bit and see if you like the playstyle. If you like the playstyle, you can start it. If you don't like the playstyle, it also depends what content you want to be doing. If you want to be doing content where you have to quickly run and dodge and like hit things on the move, not a build for that. Like Sanctum, not a build for that. So I would not recommend it for that, but just for like general gameplay is okay. Then we have EA. So EA has issues. So it's a relatively strong build, but the problem with EA is that the damage is very delayed. The playstyle is very clunky. This is my subjective thing, right? Like I would not want to delay the damage by so many factors, right? Because it's a triple delayed damage. So for example, when I play Toxic Rain, right? I play Toxic Rain a lot. It's delayed damage as in I shoot it and it does a dot, right? But some people played like Toxic Rain Ballista and that was already too slow for me, right? Which is you put a totem and then the totem shoots and then it deals a dot, right? So that was already too slow for me. This is like 3 times instead of 2 times. So you put a totem, then they shoot, then they explode, and then ignite deals a dot. So you have like 3 steps before you start dealing damage. So that's why I would say this is like a weaker build, because it's a little bit on the slower side. It's not very satisfying to play either for me. Like personally, I'll just put it in here. It can be strong if you want to play, especially like in hardcore, but I would definitely not put it up there with the other ones. This is also, I'm mostly looking through the lens of like softcore trade as well, so keep that in mind. Explosive trap, either S tier or A tier. I would still think probably S tier. Probably S tier. The shrapnel one got slightly nerfed, but there are, I would say, according to like Fearless Dumbo, who's like just plays this build exclusively pretty much, it's still extremely strong. I think I would still put it at an S tier, especially at in a league start scenario, right, where you can get a lot of damage early on, you can get a lot of speed early on, and you can basically just do every type of content that you want, right? This is gonna be similar. I'm gonna put Ice Trap in the same category. I'm just gonna put them both together because they're basically the same build. You have one version of a trap that has better clear, and then for Shrapnel Ballista, it's probably still the same version for single target, and for Ice Trap is the other version of the skill for single target probably, unless you get enough AoE for overlaps. So both of these skills have very straightforward progression. They have good guides made for them. They are great boss killers, and if you're playing a great boss killer, typically on a league start, that's going to be really good, because early on at low levels of gear, single target matters more than later on in the game, right? Because later on in the game, if you're playing a skill that has a little bit of a weaker single target and you put some currency in it, that suddenly solves your biggest issue, and now the build is completely fine. But early on in the league, like how much damage can it do on like a cheap budget, right? You get a couple of like cheap uniques and get your levels, and then how early you can start doing bosses, how early you can start doing like blasting map bosses is gonna be a thing this league. There's so many different scarabs for that, the T17 maps and so on. So these builds are definitely something that can excel at that. That's why I would put it here. Now we have Exsanguinate. So Exsanguinate, I think it's gonna be a very strong starter. Exsanguinate particularly, I think is Exsanguinate Mines, the thing that Tuna played. Very strong build in terms of clear early on. You have a decent amount of speed with any of these like trap and mine skills. The good thing about them is that you want to stack frenzy charges early on, and these frenzy charges give you attack speed, and typically you're going to be using it to shield charge as well, right? So any like shield charge build is going to be quick early on and have a really nice time clearing maps early. You're going to be able to, especially with this, have good clear. So you kill good amount of monsters on the way to the boss. You kill the boss quickly because you move there really quickly and you have a decent amount of damage. This is not like a huge amount of single target damage early, but it's good enough to like clear everything you need. So definitely a very strong league starter. If you haven't seen it in action before, I'd recommend checking it out. It might be something really for you. Now we have Flicker Strike. So Flicker Strike is going to be a MasterCard tier. This is a build that is typically played by, okay, you're either a Giga Chad for playing this, or you are basically, you're one of those, accounts with Korean names that have ungodly amounts of currency immediately at the league start, and but they started by playing a Flicker. Something's fishy going on there, huh? Something fishy is going on there. But yeah, Flicker Strike is going to be in the MasterCard tier. Kind of a meme. Don't recommend starting it unless you are like, if you're watching this tier list, right? You're probably not one of the people who start Flicker Strike, because people who start Flicker Strike don't watch tier list, they don't watch build guides, they don't watch like videos about what are the top 5 best league starters. They know they're gonna start with Flicker Strike, and nothing is gonna stop them. And nothing's gonna stop them in the maps either. This is kind of similar. Frost Blades are basically the same thing. This doesn't scale that very well at the beginning. People play it as a raider. Both of these ascendancies people play as a raider, which with Flicker makes sense. With this, kind of makes sense. But they're okay early on. You can clear with it, but you're not really going to have a great time. You're not going to have a great time killing like any bosses. You're not going to have a great time killing anything that's a little bit more difficult. These builds basically just skip over the difficult content. You just zoom past the difficult stuff and just kill the easy stuff. Then we have Frostblink. So Frostblink, I would put it probably in a B tier. Frostblink Ignite. It has been buffed, added cold damage is now giving you more flat damage for your ignites. So for example, if you're using the unique boots, I forget what they're called, but they're like unique boots that give you added cold damage to spells, cold damage to spells on your weapons. You're gonna get a little bit of extra ignite DPS, which is gonna help your clear. And then you're also going to be able to use something like, for example, Val Flame Blast with the Valkyrie's gloves for single target early on with the ignites, and you're gonna have a really good start. You can get it off pretty quickly off the ground. Ignite Elementalist in general is very strong. I think where is Wave of Conviction? Wave of Conviction, I would put it here together with it. Pretty good starter. It can transition into something like EK if you know what you're doing. I think 2 leagues ago I was playing EK Ignite at the league start. I had really good time. I was playing it with shield charge as well rather than the bow version. I think the shield charge version was really strong, and basically allowed you to clear even faster because you not only had the clear but you also had the mobility. Because if you don't have the mobility, you're just gonna clear 2 screens, and then what you're gonna have to walk 2 screens to see the next monster. Like, you just have to have a lot of movement speed or shield charge with this type of a build. So Ignite Elementalist in general, very strong. Val Flame Blast and Flame Blast is something that can be played with this as well. There's a lot of different skill. Like Ignite Elementalist is basically an archetype that you can play with anything. So if you are interested in doing content like, for example, Expedition, Corrupting Fever, or Ignite Elementalist are probably the best builds. For Expedition, Ignite Elementalist is basically, you literally touch a monster and then the entire expedition explodes. I have videos on this. Like, if you look at my channel, you'll see I clear expeditions with Leap Slam. I made like a gorilla Leap Slam build. And then I also used the same build. I took off my skills and I only used auto attack. And with just auto attack, I was able to ignite a monster, like just ignite a random white monster, and that monster explodes because of explode chest, and the whole screen explodes, right? With the herald, explosion, proliferation, and ignite. So you can see how I made that character, and you can see basically how that works. If you have explode chest, ignite proliferation, and if you're playing elementals with any skill that has decently high base damage, you're gonna have a really good time at the league start. Hex Blast. So Hex Blast, typically played as a Hex Blast Miner, although people try to play other archetypes with it as well. Hex Blast, I would probably put either A tier or S tier. The playstyle is not for everyone. I would probably put it at an A tier. That's just my personal preference. I tried playing with the skill, and early on it didn't feel that impressive compared to some other stuff that I was doing. So I would probably not put it as an S tier. This is my personal preference. Someone else would put it in an S tier. Someone might put it in XDD tier, so I might put it in a B tier. I would put it personally in an A tier, which is among the really good builds. So really good builds that can excel at something, right? So this can especially excel. People keep saying this is great at Sanctums. Apparently it's great at Sanctums because it's like auto targets. I guess it's kind of similar to like Shockwave Totem in that sense, with like Astral Projector, except worse, but requiring, you know, less gear, I guess. So this is definitely something good to get started with if you are interested in pushing Atlas to the high tiers very early on. This is definitely good. It has very high base damage, and with the mines being detonated automatically, it's going to be really good because it also out detonate only when there is a monster in range, right? So this is a really good skill, definitely solid starter. I highly recommend it. Then we have Nova, like Ice Nova. I think Ice Nova I would put probably in a B tier. So it's pretty strong. It has nice single target damage if you're using like the Ice Nova of Frost Bolts. But with Ice Nova of Frost Bolts, the main issue that you get is the fact that you have to have like slow projectile speed. So your clear kind of suffers, and you end up being limited by your projectile speed, and you constantly outrun the Frost Bolts, right? So you constantly outrun Frost Bolts, which means you're running into the monsters, and you're not benefiting from the freeze there, and then you have to shoot the Frost Bolts, and then you have to press the button. So it's like a little bit of a 2-button playstyle. It's still very strong. I would still put it in a B tier, which is like good builds, but not as good as the A tier builds. And then we have, okay, this is Ice Spear, this is Ice Shot, right? So Ice Shot, I'll probably also put it here. Ice Shot is pretty strong. I started with Ice Shot before. It is really good in terms of like if you want to blast maps and you want to get Headhunter early and scale with that. If you want to do some legions, if you want to do like map blasting, this is one of the good skills. Definitely recommend it. It's similar to Lightning Arrow. I think Lightning Arrow is slightly better. It has slightly better clear, but this is still good. Still really good skill to start with. It has very easy leveling. I have a leveling guide for beginners on my channel that I uploaded recently, and that guide is using Ice Shot because of how simple it is to get started with, right? So you equip it at level 2, and you just go with it until the end game, until you have a Headhunter and you're blasting maps. So highly recommended as a starter as well if you've never tried it before. If you want to mix things up and you like bow builds, this is definitely something you can do. Ice Spear, should I put it in a MasterCard tier? Ice Spear could be in a MasterCard tier, or it could be in a not a starter, or it could be in a C tier. Because people are playing Ice Spear totems as well, right? So I guess we're gonna put it in a C tier because it is a starter if you're playing it as totems. But if you're playing it with like a custom crit, then it'll be a MasterCard tier, and then otherwise it will be as like a not a starter, right? So I guess we'll put it in a C tier because people are like starting with totems as well, but it's not a great playstyle as far as I see. Icicle Mine. So Icicle Mine probably B tier as well. Icicle Mine is not that bad actually. It's pretty nice at league start. It has quite nice tree. Like if you start with a Shadow, you can start with a Shadow or you can start with a Ranger, and you're gonna have a good time with both. You're gonna get depending on like how you want to build it in the end game, right? But this is actually pretty underrated skill, pretty strong, pretty good amount of damage early. Not for everyone, but if you've never seen it, I recommend checking it out. KB, so like Kinetic Bolt. Kinetic Bolt, I would say not a starter. So it might end up being insanely strong, and this let's just call this whole thing Wonder in general, right? So Wonder might end up being really strong. It depends on how exactly the wisps trigger, right? There's a new support gem for Wonders, which gives you like 2 wisps that whenever you attack a rare or unique enemy, they have a chance to like trigger and like start attacking with you, which increases your single target damage. But I don't know how strong that's going to be early and how much does it actually help. I've seen different calculations that people are doing. Some people are saying it's like 30 to 40% more damage. Some people are saying it's like 80 to 150% more damage because of how it works with barrage or something, right? And like it triggers on every attack or whatever. So I don't know how strong it exactly will be. Again, whenever a new skill is released, this is something to really be cautious of, unless you know exactly what you're doing. For example, in the league where, what is the skill called? The fire skill, Blazing Salvo. Okay, I started with Blazing Salvo, the league it was released, and I started with Blazing Salvo mines, and there was also a bug with projectile. Like I knew exactly what I was doing, and I had a great time. I was killing bosses on day 1. It was amazing. But if you don't know what you're doing and the skill is not tested, it might not work as intended, right? People might be releasing videos and talking about it. I think that I saw someone make a video. He had like a thumbnail. It's the guy that puts like a cutout of himself in a video, and he had like a thumbnail. Uber ready, new skill, easy leveling or something, and it was the new poison's concoction that bounces, and it's gonna be really funny when that doesn't actually work. So yeah, good luck with those builds that are like saying Uber ready, but they're using a skill that has never been played before and nobody saw it. Good luck. So yeah, then we have Lightning Arrow. So Lightning Arrow is going to be S tier or A tier, probably A tier. Probably A tier. So it's gonna be S tier for you, but it's in general gonna be an A tier, because it's gonna lack the single target damage early if you do not invest into it enough. It's paired basically with Artillery Ballista, so it's in the same tier. So we're keeping the consistency here. Again, A tier is good skills. You're gonna have a good time playing with it, right? So all of these skills are like you're gonna have a good time. So Lightning Arrow is very nice for blasting maps early, for going fast and just going into the maps and clearing them from safe distance. A lot of people like bows. It's one of the stronger bow skills. Definitely recommend it as a starter. Still gonna be really strong. But it requires some currency. There's typically a lot of competition for elemental bows, so it's gonna cost you some currency as well. So Depends on your skill as a player and on your skill in terms of like acquiring currency early on, but definitely a good starter. So I would definitely put this one as one that I recommend. Now we have Lightning Conduit. So Lightning Conduit is S tier. Lightning Conduit is amazing, and I would actually put it with Stormbrand because I think you should probably play those two together, right? So this is if I was gonna start something for fun, just to like have fun and like play whatever I think is fun without any like different plan. I want to play PoE and have fun. This is probably what I would start. I would start with Stormbrand, Lightning Conduit. I think it's a very fun combo. You can get enough damage on Stormbrand, just regular Stormbrand if you want, just to clear the maps very nicely. You can add Herald for MTX explosions. You can use Impulsa if you want, and then you're gonna have Lightning Conduit, which is gonna double your damage, right? Lightning Conduit is a very strong skill, does huge amount of damage. Stormbrand is good as a triggering skill for it, right? So it's a pretty fun playstyle because you're just running around, throwing browns around. You have some target. Oh, you press you hold down the button for Lightning Conduit. Zap, zap, zap. It's dead. Then you just keep running. Very, very fun playstyle. Very strong skill. A good amount of single target damage early. Good for Sanctums early. Lightning Conduit is gonna be able to handle any boss early on as well. It has really good amount of damage. Definitely recommend this combo. So that's why I put Stormbrand here. Stormbrand on its own, like without Lightning Conduit, does not belong in S tier at all. Like it's probably like a B tier, maybe C tier, like on its own. But because Lightning Conduit exists, this is pretty much a combo that you want to look at together. And Lightning Conduit is very, very strong. I would put it in this tier. So Lightning Strike. Lightning Strike is kind of similar to LA, similar to Lightning Arrow. I would put it a little bit weaker than Lightning Arrow. It can have a higher single target damage. It can have weaker clear. It still has decent clear, but again, requires currency, requires knowing what you're doing. It is a melee skill, kinda-ish. The last league, it was a little bit stronger because of the tinctures, I think, right? The tinctures really helped it last league. But I think this league is not going to be as strong as these A-tier builds. It's still going to be a good league starter potentially. I think all of these are like good league starter, like Ignite Elementalist, Corrupting Fever, like Frost Nova or Frost Bolts. These would be like good league starters. So I would definitely put it in this tier that is okay to league start with, but like not a top league starter. And we got, what is this? This is a Mana Forged Arrows. So if I was rating Mana Forged Arrows as a build, right? So Mana Stacking Mana Forged Arrows build, I would probably put it in this tier. But as a league starter, I'll of course have to put it in this year because this is not a league starter. I would definitely not recommend like starting with Mana Forge Arrows, Mana Stacking build if you're going to be, unless you're gonna be playing in this tier. But this tier is what I would put it in. Very strong build. Probably not a starter. You should probably start with some other build that can get off the ground with a low amount of currency and then later transition into that. Penance Brand of Dissipation. Okay, this is gonna potentially surprise some people. Okay, where am I gonna put Penance Brand of Dissipation? I'm gonna put it in an S tier for sure. Like, in my opinion, it's still an S tier starter. Here is my reasoning for this. If you look at the buff, the nerf to the skill damage, it is about 60-65% nerf in terms of the damage compared to the last league. But here's the interesting thing about it. We are comparing this to the post-fix Penance Brand before the Runebinder was fixed, and after the Runebinder fix, you basically got double the damage, right? Before Runebinder was fixed, Penance Brand of Dissipation was still the strongest skill. So last league, when Penance Brand of Dissipation was bugged, or the Runebinder with it was bugged, and it had 50% less damage, it was still the strongest skill in the game. And now it's gonna have 65% less damage. So in actuality, if we are comparing it to the first pre-fix version of the Penance Brand, it's like a 20-30% nerf. 20-30% nerf, like even like a 30% nerf when you're comparing it to the pre-fix version, is still incredibly strong. It's still a very strong skill. If you want to know how to play this build at a league start and you want to be, softcore you're a softcore player, you don't care about dying, so you're a cast on death portal enjoyer. If you're into just maximizing damage and doing huge deeps with this and just destroying everything, just destroying sanctums, for example, and things like that early, then you can follow Zboob, for example, on Twitch. He has a nice guide for it, and this is going to be still a very strong build. If you want clear, use Impulsa, or play for something like Elementalist, or scale AoE some other way. Like you can use like Adorned with Jewels Corrupted with AoE. You can use so many different things to scale AoE to a huge amount, that this is going to be something still really strong, right? Because you can get Impulsa early, you can have a good clear. It's Brands, right? Like Brands, people say this has bad clear, but that was honestly not my experience. I was playing Trickster, the clear was completely fine. Like if you have enough damage, your clear is gonna be fine, right? If you have enough cast speed, your clear is gonna be fine because you're gonna get the extra AoE, right? So you're gonna be able to clear just fine with this skill. Like I would definitely not be worried about clearing with it, as long as you do enough damage, and this skill does enough damage, right? So still very strong starter, I would say. You can start with the other brands. You can start with like Armageddon brand while leveling, and then swap to this when you can afford to buy it. Still very, very strong skill. Then we have Puncture. So that's going to represent a Bleed Bow, something like Bleed Bow Gladiator, for example. I would probably put it in C tier, I think. Probably in C tier. Maybe I would put it in... Yeah, I think I would still put it in C tier. So it has issues, and the main issue is the fact that you have to aim snipe, okay? And that is pretty much the only issue of the build. If you had like a better skill to aim at things, and you had like a better quality of life with that, it would be probably like an A tier build, I think, because it can scale very, very well, especially like with enough investment. I've seen people get a huge amount of damage on Bleed Bow. It's a pretty fun build to play. It's nice for clearing early. It really doesn't have like big drawbacks. You're playing it as a duelist. You have decent defense, you have decent damage, you have decent clear, you have good single target damage with the snipe, but the problem is that it's a bit clunky, and there is not that much support for it in the game in terms of like modifiers you can easily get very early on gear. I think this is one of the builds that you either love it or you hate it. I think this is definitely a valid league starter, but it's not as strong as any of these like good or very good league starters. Poison's Concoction. So P-Conc I'll probably put in the same tier. Very clunky, hurts your wrist. This is when I was doing a lot of heist. Poison's Concoction was faster to level than Toxic Rain because of the shield charge, and you are scaling attack speed as well. But the problem is you have to press so many buttons. You have to press so many buttons with this skill. You have to aim, you have to directly try to hit and overlap, and it's not as like with Toxic Rain, right? Because Toxic Rain has damage over time. So with people like always say Toxic Rain, you have to aim exactly at packs. Bullshit, you don't. Like if you're playing it wrong if you're doing it like that, right? So with Toxic Rain, if you're trying to clear, right, you're playing like heist, you're playing maps, whatever, you run, you hold your mouse cursor like slightly, like let's say this is your character, right, and you're running in this direction, so you hold your mouse cursor in here, and you just keep tapping the button. You just keep tapping the button, and you're shooting in front of you, and then monsters run through it while chasing you and die. There's no aiming, right? There's no aiming outside of like bosses or like you're fighting an essence or something. There's no aiming while playing. You just get enough AoE, right? You get 39% AoE, which is good enough to like cover most of the screen, and you're just completely just tapping the button. You're just holding left click, tapping right click, or tapping whatever hotkey you have, and you're just leaving the dots, and then monsters run through the dots. You cannot do that with Poison's Concoction. With Poison's Concoction, you have to hit the freaking monster, and you do want the overlaps as well, and then you have to pay attention to your Plague Bearer, and then Plague Bearer doesn't do enough damage, so you have to slow down. You cannot just shield charge, right? If you're doing like more difficult content, your Plague Bearer is not going to do enough damage to kill everything as quickly as you can shield charge through it. So you have to stand back, you have to stay, and you have to curse. That's another button. It's just very, very annoying to play. It can be really strong on a low budget, but the fact that they made it so clunky and that they made it require more flasks, so now you have to wear another life flask, which means you lose a utility flask. So it's not really as strong as before, but it's still a valid league starter, I guess. Spectres, I would say Spectres would be not a starter tier. So this is something that can potentially be extremely strong in this league. Spectres will be very, very powerful, but it is not really a starter build, because you do require some investment. You require the Spectres before that. Like before you get the T17 new Spectres, you have to progress through the entire Atlas, and that means you're probably playing a different build, right? You're playing the Zoo build or whatever. You're not playing like a pure Spectre. You're not using damage Spectre, you're using utility Spectres, so different build. Then we have Zombies. Zombies output probably in the C tier maybe, as a starter. Like if you just want to focus on zombies, they're not going to be that strong. You have to sacrifice either clear or damage, because for your supports you're going to have to either use melee splash once you get 2 maps, or you're going to have to swap to like single target damage, right, for like multi-strike melee physical damage or whatever you're using. So you lose a little bit in that sense. I think the Zoo Necromancer is a little bit stronger if you're focusing on multiple minions. You're using like skeletons, for example. There's a huge amount of damage. Skeletons typically do more single target damage than zombies. So that's why the combo of those two would be higher ranked than just like pure zombie build. Later on, zombies might be great, but as a league starter, pure zombie is not that good. Righteous Fire. So Righteous Fire is gonna be probably like a B tier starter. The main reason why it's here is because there is it's a great playstyle for a lot of people, right? So a lot of people really enjoy the playstyle. There is great support in terms of the guides that exist for it, right? Like Pox's guide for RF is very detailed, and so anybody can just get into it and start with it. And it does work well on the league start in that sense, right? So definitely something that a lot of people will enjoy. Not as good as the top tier builds, but still okay league starter. Then we have Smite. So Smite, this will be like a armor stacker typically. Again, not a starter, something you want to do later in the league. I don't think much more explanation is needed there. And then we got Shockwave Totem. So Shockwave Totem is very interesting. I think Shockwave Totem is something that I would put probably in an A tier. And there's a few reasons for that. So the only reason why I wouldn't put it in an S tier is because it requires Astral Projector. If Astral Projector is expensive early, if you need to pay a div or two early on, that delays you a little bit. But that's why I wouldn't put it in an S tier, but it is on like similar level of power to those. So with Astral Projector, this is excellent for doing things like Sanctums. This is excellent for doing like more difficult content where you're fighting bosses, right? Excellent for bossing. Like you just leave a totem on the ground and just run around, and it just destroys everything, right? You can do like Fizz converted to cold. You can scale the damage really high. It's a very comfy playstyle. It's just off-screen shit, and you're having a good time. So very strong build, but it does have some requirements, which is why it's not like in a higher tier. Then we have Reap. So Reap, I would put it probably in not a starter setup. Definitely has certain requirements that it makes it a very, very strong build, but not as a league starter, right? If you have the right gear, if you have the right setup, the right gems, right, like awakened gems and stuff like that, then it can be very, very powerful, right? Some of the strongest, most like cracked builds in the game use Reap, right? Like builds that are nearly immortal and do like 100 million DPS, while being like impossible to die for this build, has still like really good single target damage. Reap allows for that. It has very nice scaling, but it's not really strong early on. You could potentially play like Reap as an Ignite Elementalist, but the problem is there are other alternatives, right? So that's why I guess it's not as good, but it can be a very fun build to play, I guess. Spark is relatively good. I think I would put Spark in the B tier, which would be the good build, especially if you like it. One of the reasons that make it good is that now we have tattoos that give you projectile speed, right? So with tattoos that give you projectile speed, you can now play it in a much more comfortable way. You can get more hits with your projectiles. You can play, Templar, you can play Witch, you can play Shadow, whatever you like, and you can still get the projectile speed without having to path too far away, without having to use an anoint if you don't want to, if you have a better anoint to get. So you can still get the projectile speed from tattoos, and that makes it a pretty good starter now. Very comfortable playstyle. can have enough, just enough damage early on to be an okay starter. And it has, because of like great playstyle, some new QOL, and overall being a nice skill for different mechanics. Like it's okay in Sanctum, it's okay in things like Simulacrums. I think Simulacrums are going to be pretty profitable this league, so pretty good starter. Then we got a Splitting Steel. So Splitting Steel, I would probably put it also in a B tier, and that might be contrary to what some other people might tell you. I think a lot of people might put it in like an S tier or A tier. I would put it in a B tier because of the requirements in gear. So this build is, there's like a night and day difference between having Nimis and not having Nimis. You can still play it as a league starter, like it's in a good league starters, right? It's together with like all the other things that's like, it's okay to league start, it's nice. You're gonna have probably a good time. And if you like it, if you like the archetype, if you literally love the build, you're gonna have a great time. But it's not going to be as strong as some of these other things without a significant investment. Nimis is potentially going to be insanely expensive this league because Ubers are now much more difficult to get to. So let me put it this way. Uber content now is going to be multiple steps removed, right? The rewards are more steps removed from acquiring them. In the past, you could just buy the Uber fragments and run the Ubers, and you would just buy one fragment, right, and just run the Uber, and the fragment would be farmable through just regular guardians or shit like that, right, or just regular maps, right? So there will be a huge abundance of them. Like everybody just does maps, right? If you're doing like T14 plus maps, you're doing altars and you're generating Uber fragments, for example, right? That like Uber Ether fragments or whatever. Now that's not going to be the case. Now to get to regular Ether, that's what's going to happen. But the Uber Ether fragments is going to come from T17 maps. Much fewer people will be doing T17 maps. And then you need a bunch of these fragments to get to the Uber fight. So that's going to be much more difficult to acquire. More steps to get it means fewer people will be doing it. They're going to be doing it slower. Just the rate of generating these invitations is going to be slower. So fewer bosses are going to be run, which means fewer rewards are going to be available, right? So Nimis is going to be probably crazy in terms of the price. So don't count on it early. It's like, just forget it, right? Like, unless you're one of the people who has the most currency, you're not going to be getting it early. So that's why I would put it here. Toxic Rain, I would put it still in probably a B tier, similar tier. Main benefits of that is really smooth and quick map progression, right? You can have 5-link Quill Rain, and you can clear your Atlas, right? You can do T6, you can like clear your Atlas, all of the T16 up to T16 maps, and clear all of the T16s. And you can kill the Ether and Exarch quest versions on like a 5-link Quill Rain with very, very minimal investment, just buying 1 C uniques. That basically get you huge amount of movement speed. So you can have like 300% bonus movement speed with 5-link Quill Rain, and you can clear your Atlas, get 2 Void Stones, and then you can just start making currency whatever way you want. You can do heist, you can do anything else, and you're gonna have a really good time, right? And then you can transition into something or invest into it. A lot of people think Toxic Rain doesn't scale well, right? Like Toxic Rain scales pretty okay. Like Toxic Rain scales with attack speed very well, right? Which is one of the things that most dot skills don't do. Most like damage over time skills, like RF, right? You increase your like damage, that's damage over time, and then your damage over time multipliers, and that's it. There is no like attack speed, cast speed, which is like additional vector of scaling that is available for you. There is nothing like that for it. But with Toxic Rain, there is an additional vector, and that is the attack speed, right? Which you can scale, which is why this actually scales pretty decently. So definitely something you can league start and have a decent time with. I have a bunch of guides for it. I recommend checking them out if you want something that is extremely fast and is not affected by any map modifiers. Toxic Rain might be actually one of the builds that people will use to farm like 8 mod corrupted, extra 2 mods from the Atlas, extra mods from the Scarabs and map device, T17s that have extra mods that are increased values of these mods. You might actually play like Toxic Rain for something like that, because Toxic Rain doesn't give a shit about most mods, right? So like ailment mods, crit mods, resist mods, only chaos affects you, right? But the chaos penalty is lower than the elemental penalty. Like so many different modifiers, like it doesn't really affect you, right? So you can play Toxic Rain for those. And I remember farming the keystone that gives you like corrupted maps being turned into like different layouts. I forget what it's called, with just like 8 mod corrupted unidentified maps, or like maps that just have randomized modifiers. And Toxic Rain was like the best build to play for that, because it just ignores the mods. So it doesn't have the highest amount of damage, but in practice it has higher amount of damage than the builds that have that damage in PoB, because PoB doesn't account for monster mods, right? Like monsters blocking, monsters resisting, monsters being crit immune, and so on and so on. And Toxic Rain ignores almost all of those mods. So that's the advantage of it. Then we have Tornado Shot. Tornado Shot, I think, is going to be delegated to a MasterCard tier. I think the only people who are going to league start with Tornado Shot build now are going to be like extreme fanatics, kind of like with Flicker, or the MasterCard tier of players, because they just want to play Tornado Shot and they don't give a shit, and they're just gonna do whatever. So definitely, I like, not a league starter, right? Because it's just single target damage is got penalized by the removal of extra projectiles, so it makes it less consistent to hit the projectiles if you have fewer of them, because of secondary projectiles being removed. So you're not going to hit with all of them as consistently. You just have lower chance, and then the attack speed penalty and mana penalty and the removal of minus mana is going to be just so much more annoying to get this set up. It's going to require more currency. Therefore, MasterCard here as a league starter. As a general build, can be still good build, but MasterCard here. And then SRS I would probably put maybe in a C tier. SRS has been nerfed significantly. If we look at SRS Guardian, for example, like the tri-elemental SRS Guardian specifically, C tier probably. Like, you can start it, still gonna be okay, but it's not gonna be anywhere near as good as before. This is what I wanted to league start. I think it was here, but it lost 50% damage. It got a 50% damage nerf on the Sentinel of Radiance, or whatever it's called, and a 40% damage nerf on the SRS itself. So it is what it is. We got hit with the nerf bot, and I'm just gonna be starting with some Necromancer version. I have some interesting stuff that I'm cooking in terms of like the build that I'm starting, but probably I don't want to share it because I don't want my items to be very expensive. So you will probably find out on the day of the league start what build I'm actually starting. But that's it. That's my tier list. If you disagree, good for you. You can disagree, make your own tier list. This is just my personal tier list. Hopefully I illuminated you a little bit with a little bit of like information and some tips about these different builds and what I think they're good at and what is required for them, and gave you like a bit of a better understanding of the meta. You can give me your opinions in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great league start and see you next time.